Namaste. Before the time of creation, Alinda alva? Before the time of creation, the only thing in existence was the root cause. And the whole universe as we see it today was merged in it in the most subtle form, everything losing its individual identity. Underline ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ. Everything losing its individual identity. Now the center, like the tiny seed of the tree, included within itself the whole of the universe in the most subtle form. It was thus the extremely abridged form of the same expanded manifestation as we see today. What we see is an expanded version. What was there was the abridged version. Thus, the center, the latent motion, and the entire creation in the most subtle form all combined together as one unit and led to the creation, cause of the creation when the time came. At the time of creation, everything began to assume the form of existence. Man also assumed his individual existence. So, more the center, the latent motion, and the entire creation in the subtle form. All the three were in one unit. Now, the consciousness of individuality was the first covering in the composition of man. Okay, individuality, the idea of separateness and the idea of separateness, that is the individuality. Further additions continued one after the other. Egoism began to develop and ultimately assumed the grosser form. The working of the senses, the mind, and the faculties began to contribute their share towards the grossness. Actions of the body and the mind led to the formation of samskaras. Finally, man now exists in the grossest form consisting of the outer gross body and the inner fine bodies and the coverings. Now, from this outer solid state of existence, we march right towards the center, passing through the finer states one after the other. From the gross body, we come to the mind body and then the causal body, growing more and finer, subtler at every step and proceed on further, dealing with other coverings. The process generally adopted for it is classified under three heads: karma, gnana, and bhakti, which offer the common basis for all the three religions and creeds. The four elementary means, the sadhana chatushtaya adopted for the purpose, were almost the same everywhere. The first of these sadhanas, the sadhana chatushtaya, there are four: viveka, vairagya, shat sampatti, and mumukshatva. The first of them, the viveka, is discrimination. We see many things in the world, but when we think of their existence, we find that they are changeable, that they are the different forms maya, as we generally call them. We are thus inwardly induced to go deeper in order to trace out the cause. Our attention is thus diverted from the transitory things to that which is unchanging and eternal. Worldly objects thus begin to lose their charm and we feel, in a way, unattached to them. This is the first step, Viveka. Now, this brings us to the state of Vairagya, renunciation, which is also known as the second of the four sadhanas. The state of Vairagya is also brought about by certain other causes too. For example, when we are fed up with some worldly objects, after indulging in them to our heart's content, we sometimes begin to feel an inward repulsion towards them. In such cases, our attention is naturally diverted to some nobler ideal and we feel a bit awakened to godly thought. Secondly, when we have been deeply pricked by the treachery and faithlessness of the world, we feel disgusted and inwardly averse to worldly things. A feeling of dissatisfaction and detachment also develops when we are in a state of bereavement on account of the death of some of our near ones. But Vairagya created under such circumstances is seldom genuine or lasting. It soon disappears with the change of adverse circumstances. So there he's given three causes. One is that you get fed up with doing an activity. Second is that you are pricked by the treachery and the faithlessness. And third one is a state of bereavement. So three temporary causes of Vairagya. Very rarely, these three temporary causes can also become permanent cause of Vairagya. But normally, these are three temporary causes. There is a story which relates that a certain man wanted to see Kabir Das. When he reached his house, he was informed that Kabir Das had gone with a funeral party to the cremation ground to burn the body of one of his deceased relations. The man proceeded to the cremation ground to see him there, but he had never seen him before. He thought it might be difficult for him to recognize Kabir Das among the party. For this purpose, he was told that he should look to the hollow around everybody's face. The hollow around the face of each one of the party would be found glowing as he proceeded towards the cremation road, but would grow dimmer and dimmer and finally disappears as they returned. Only the hollow around Kabir's face would remain glowing all through with equal luster. Hollow Allah, halo, brightness. Thus, the feeling of vairagya, actuated by such sudden causes, is generally short-lived and changes with the change of circumstance. For though the sudden shock temporarily creates a feeling of vairagya, the seed of desires and enjoyments still lie buried deep within the heart and may sprout forth immediately when it finds a congenial atmosphere. The feeling of vairagya in the real sense and with lasting results can only be developed after thorough cleaning and due moderation. Underline ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ. Vairagya, which is supposed to be lasting, can only be developed with thorough cleaning and moderation. Without these two elements, the vairagya can be seldom permanent. Now, Vedantists practice vairagya in a different way. They force their imagination to believe that everything they see is Maya, hence transitory or false, and conclude that reality at the bottom is the Brahman. They apply the power of will or thought to strengthen the thought so much so that they get habituated to it, causing modification in outward actions and habits only. However, the effect is mostly merely external. It may, however, after long and continued practice, possibly reflect somewhat inwardly. Similarly, Viveka, actuated by mere forcing of imagination without a touch of practicality, has no sound basis. A close study of the subject will show that ideally Viveka and Vairagya are not the means, but only the results of some means. So Viveka and Vairagya are states of mind developed at different stages of constant practice of certain yogic sadhanas like remembrance, devotion, or love, etc. So that's what we look at. We look at Viveka and Vairagya as states of mind developed because of some other practices, not a sadhana to be practiced separately in our system. Viveka, in the true sense, never develops unless the senses are purified, thoroughly purified. Underline ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ. Viveka only develops when the senses are thoroughly purified. This happens only when the mind gets properly regulated and disciplined, and egoism assumes a final state, purified state. Thus, it is that the Viveka is in fact the result of practices followed in order to bring about the results. Now, the Vairagya, the second sadhana of the Vedantis, is likewise the result of Viveka. They are thus the stages of elementary attainment in yoga and not the sadhanas or the means of attainment in the stages. So Viveka develops when the senses are thoroughly purified. But for the senses to be thoroughly purified, the mind needs to be regulated and disciplined. And egoism has to be brought to a more purified state. So Viveka ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ? ಯಾವ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್? ವಿವೇಕ 8th point.
When we unlock the divine wisdom we get.
ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಂಚೆನೇ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ವಿವೇಕ.
5th point.
ಹೌದು 5th point. Confusion versus clarity ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ that clarity is nothing but viveka. So viveka comes at the 5th point. But for that, what needs to happen? The senses need to be purified, the mind needs to be regulated and disciplined, and the egoism needs to be brought to a more subtler state. These are the three things. In other words, by the time you come to the 5th point and cross it, you have lost the grosser ego. Remember, we spoke about the grosser ego, subtle ego, and the identity. All the three are ego only in different stages. In the Pinda Pradesh, it's in the grossest form. That's the grosser ego. In the mind region, it's in a subtler form. That's the 11 circles of ego. In the central region, it's in the form of identity. Seriya, gross identity. That is ego. In fact, it's not the identity which is the ego. The grossness associated with the identity is the ego. And the grossness is the three coverings. The separation, anxiety, desire. Those are the three coverings. Serena. So they are the three levels of ego. But example ಕೇಳಿದಾಗ, you need to write the 11 circles of ego. That's what they are expecting you to write in the mind region. Okay? Any questions? So Viveka comes as you cross the fifth point. As you cross the fifth point, 5 levels of gross ego is crossed. The mind is reasonably regulated and disciplined. And the senses are now purified to a certain extent. Without the purification of the mind or the regulation of the mind, the senses cannot get purified. Okay?
Whether can Viveka also develop with age based on experience? Let's say there is a person who is not part of Sahaj Marg and he has become old, he has got thorough experience of life. Is that Viveka and this Viveka different? They say wine, wisdom like wine matures with age or becomes better with age.
But like wine maturing with age, it does not get liberation or realization.
That's different. No, that's a
A
different
person who
context, but
matures
I'm just talking about Viveka.
like wine does not get realization or liberation with age. Maturity that comes with age is insufficient for the sake of liberation and realization. Because the basis for it is the experience of the life. And also the quieting down of the faculties with age. But is that what you require for realization or liberation? No, you require sharp faculties. That's why liberation and realization is possible at a younger age, much more easily than with older age. Because by the time you come to old age, the faculties of the mind have now become quietened down. They lose their sharpness. So, Viveka that comes with maturity of age is of a different nature as opposed to the Viveka that comes because of the spiritual journey in the first 5 points. They are two different things. Although they both can have similar qualities to a certain extent. For example, an aged person might feel less attraction towards certain things because of the aging process, because of the maturity. A younger person might feel more attraction. But as you grow with age, the mind does not get fully regulated or disciplined. So, in other words, the unnecessary thinking has to be given up. Unnecessary emotions have to be given up. We have to allow the buddhi to get modified into viveka. Now, for example, a person who might get older might want to avoid certain things because they see that it's futile to do it. Because they have now matured, that there is no point in actually fighting over certain things because it's only futile. It's just a waste of time. However, the basis is just that futility of doing things, not the basis of going towards God or going towards the divine. So the basis is totally different. Since the basis is different, the extent you develop these qualities also will be different to that degree. When the basis is realization of God, then all of these states have to mature to a large extent and the mind has to become thoroughly disciplined, which does not occur just because of the maturity of age. Okay. So on the surface of it, it appears like they are both similar. It's like the ignorance of a child and the innocence of a child and innocence of a person who is in old age. They appear very similar. For example, in the last few years of aging, like the child has no control over its continence of passing urine or feces. Old age person also loses the continence. So it's very similar. But we don't call it as innocence relating to the childhood. That is a different state. It's because of illness that happens, because of the aging plus the illness, and we try to treat it. So the point is, there it is because of the dysfunction of the organs. In childhood, it is because of the non-development of the organs fully. Does it make sense? The cause is different. So the way that it's looked at is different, the way that it is handled different. However, both are incontinence only. On the surface, both appear similar. Same. The innocence of the child is related to the samskaras lying dormant. That's the reason. Now, in an adult, if they develop innocence, it is because the samskaras have been cleaned away. Now, for a child, the innocence in the child is inadequate to give liberation and realization because the samskaras are still lying dormant. But for an adult, that innocence which comes with the cleaning of the samskaras is sufficient enough to take them towards liberation and realization. Does it make sense? So,
Of course,
on
yeah.
the surface, it looks very similar, but we need to dig deep to understand the basis of it, and then you can work out the outcome of it. The outcome is determined by the basis, not through the intermediary phase that you might pass through, which might appear similar in many different circumstances. Like, for example, in the previous chapter, in the previous paragraph, we read about Vairagya, temporary cause of Vairagya. Somebody deceives another person. Somebody sees that there is no faith. Somebody sees that they have lost their loved one in the state of bereavement. And you have actually indulged in something to the heart's content. Now, these are all four causes of Vairagya, but they're all temporary. The basis is not your intention to go towards God. When the basis is your intention to go towards God, then the Vairagya will be more permanent. When the basis is temporary happening that happens during our day-to-day life, temporary upheavals that happens during the day-to-day course of life, that can only cause temporary Vairagya and not permanent. So remember, the basis determines the outcome, not the intermediary phase. Intermediary phase can appear similar. So the Vairagya that you see in a person who's lost their loved ones, or a person who has been deceived, or who sees that there is faithlessness across the world, the basis is that bitter experience, not God realization. So since the basis is that bitter experience, it's only temporary. As and when the experience changes into something more favorable, that experience of Vairagya passes. Okay? So that's the answer. It's only temporary. And the basis of old age related maturity is only the life experiences that they have passed through. It's not shedding of the life experiences. In spirituality, what you require is that you should not hold on to any experience. In old age, you actually hold on to certain experiences. Okay? So you have experience, then you have the learnings from experience, and then you have to let go of the experience in order to hold on to the learning, and eventually you have to let go of the learning also. Those are the four stages in spirituality. First, you have experience. Then, second stage, you have learnings from experience. And in the third stage, you let go of the experience, just hold on to the learning. In the fourth stage, you let go of the learning also. Then you are in the natural state. Does it make sense? So the person with old age will be stuck at the second level. They have certain experiences, they have certain learning from experiences, they hold on to the experience and also the learning. So is that going to empty them? No, it's going to keep them full only. There's no emptying there. So if you want to proceed towards the liberation and realization, you have to learn to go to the next two steps, which is let go of the experience, hold on to the learning temporarily, and then learning to let go of the learnings also. Then you come to the natural state. Seri. Seri. So Viveka in the true sense it never develops unless the senses are thoroughly purified. So ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ mind is like the center and the tentacles are the senses. So when the mind gets purified, the samskaras which are there in the senses also gets drawn back to the mind and they also now start getting cleared off. It's then that the senses become purified or go back to their original state. You cannot directly clear the senses. You can clear the mind, then from there the samskaras come back to the senses, to the mind from the senses, and then they are cleaned. Then the senses are said to be purified. Sarina. This happens only when the mind gets properly, thoroughly regulated and disciplined, and egoism, ahankar, assumes a purified state. That is the mind region. So first 5 stages of ego is gone. Thus, is that Viveka is in fact the practices followed in order to bring about the desired results. Now, Vairagya, the second sadhana of the Vedantis, is likewise the result of Viveka. They are thus the stages of elementary attainment of yoga, and not the sadhanas are the means of the attainments of the stages. In the Sahajmarg system of yoga, Viveka and Vairagya are not treated as sadhanas but are left aside to be developed automatically by the aspirant during his progress. It starts from what is known as the third sadhana of the Vedantis, which consists of 6 forms of the spiritual attainment as known as Shat Sampattis. The first of these Sampattis is Sham or Shama, which pertains to the peaceful condition of the mind leading to a state of calmness and tranquility. When we practice it, Viveka and Vairagya follow automatically. So Viveka and Vairagya follow automatically when we practice Shama as per Sahajmarg. That's what we do. We don't take Viveka and Vairagya to be developed separately. Vairagya, in the sense of non-existence of things, is, in my opinion, a very different process. For it is in you to have to take up a negative course and discard or reject everything that comes to your view. But if you take up the positive view and accept one thing only as real, sticking to it wholeheartedly, other things will naturally fall into the background, and by you will be unmindful of them. So you don't see there are two aspects of approach to Vairagya. In one approach to Vairagya, you look at everything and look at each thing as negative, that they don't exist. In positive view of Vairagya, you take one thing and you take that as the reality. And you are go on thinking about that as the positive thing. In other words, that's the positive view. You take one thing and stick to it as reality. What then happens is every other thing will automatically drop off. Other things will naturally fall into the background, and by you will become unmindful of them. Consequently, your attachment with them will gradually begin to disappear and you will gain Vairagya by the easiest means. Thus, the primary thing in yoga is the proper regulation of the mind, which is ever restless. It creates numerous thoughts and ideas, imparts stimulus to the senses and faculties, and sets the body to action. Everything, good or bad, evil originates from the mind, and it is the mind alone that governs all our feelings, emotions, and impulses. So you just need to work on the mind. That's all. ಸರಿನಾ ಸರಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸೋಣಂತ ಸಾಕು 5-6 ಪೇಜ್ ಆಯಿತು ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಐ ವಾಂಟ್ ಯು ಟು ಟೆಲ್ ಮಿ ದ ಡಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಬಿಟ್ವೀನ್ ದ ಸ್ಪಿರಿಚುವಲ್ ಹೀಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಹೀಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಹೌ ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಯುಟಿಲೈಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಅವರ್ ಜರ್ನಿ ದಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ನಿನ್ನೆ ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರ ನೋಡಿದ್ಯಾ ನಿನ್ನೆ ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅರ್ಧ ಕಟ್ ಅರ್ಧ ಯಾವ್ದು ಅರ್ಧ
ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್
ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್ ಅರ್ಧ ನೋಡಿದ್ಯಾ? ಹಾಡು ಕೇಳಿದ್ಯಾ? ಹಾಡು ಬಂದಿರ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ ಪಿಕ್ಚರಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಡುದು. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಹಾಫಲ್ಲೇ ಇದೆ ಅದು, ಕರೆಕ್ಟಾ?
30-45 ಮಿನಿಟ್ ಅಷ್ಟ ನೋಡಂತ.
ಹಾ
45 ಮಿನಿಟ್ಸ್ ಅಷ್ಟ ನೋಡಂತ.
ಅಷ್ಟೇನಾ? ಅಷ್ಟರಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಡು ಅಂತ?
ಒಂದ್ ಹಾಡಿತ್ತು.
ಆಯ್ತು. ಆ ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ನೋಡಿದ್ವಲ್ಲ, ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಮಿಲ್ಕಿ ವೇ, ಯಾರು ನೋಡಿದ್ರಿ ಅದನ್ನ? ನೋಡಿದ್ರ? ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ? That's exactly what happens in our journey. And remember, the journey through the microcosm is the journey through the macrocosm. ಆ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ರಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ನೋಡಿದ್ರ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಸುತ್ತ? ಆ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಬ್ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ ಹೋಲ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ, ನೋಡಿದ್ರ? ಏನಿ
But
Brother,
center is not black hole, alva. It's from
center looked at from a physical perspective is black hole. Center looked at from a spiritual perspective is different. ಈಗ ತಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, both the forms appears similar, but the way that you look at it differs. The basis of looking at it, the perspective that you look at it or experience it will be different. So the basis there is a physicality. The basis here is spirituality. So obviously the outcome also will be different. The outcome as far as physicality is black hole. The outcome as far as spirituality is concerned is nothingness or fullness.
So every black hole that science sees is to material perspective, and it is not in the right sense then.
Correct. They are looking at it from a physical perspective. Then when we go back to the center of the Milky Way, that is one world, one universe. And then you have n number of universes in the world. N number of worlds, no? Everything has their own, each galaxy, there are so many universes.
And you also had mentioned about egg cell.
This is our primary cell. The Milky Way is the primary cell, the master cell. And there are many worlds relating to other cells.
So where is that egg like structure? I couldn't see it. There were some small circles nearby the center, but Milky Way as a whole itself is an egg, right? So where are the other eggs?
ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. You have to go to the center of the Milky Way. If you go to the center of the Milky Way, you don't find milk there. ಸರಿ. But that's a interesting question. So when you go to the center ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಒಂದು ಲೆವೆಲ್ ರಿಯಲೈಸ್ ಆಯ್ತು, center of the Milky Way. But is that the center of the entire universe, entire creation? No, that's not the center of entire creation. It's the center of entire creation of our world, our universe, that's all. But there are multiple universes in this world. So we need to go towards that center.
So which point would that be if we go to the center of Milky Way?
That you work out. For that you need to see the cosmic microwave background. Look at the YouTube channel video on CMB, cosmic microwave background. ಆಯ್ತು, ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ನಾನು ಓದಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬಲ್ಲಿ.
Brother, if he has finished his questions, I just want to ask you something. Have you finished, brother?
Yes,
Anything
yes.
else?
You can continue.
Okay. Yeah. Brother, you are talking about heat, correct? What's the heat in the material world and in the spiritual world? What difference? There's also another heat that we are born with, isn't it? They say that it is given to you by your mother, that urja, I mean, how active you are or how dormant you are, whatever, is a heat that is given to you by your mother. What is that?
There are only two fundamental heats.
Hmm.
Either it's a spiritual heat or it's a material heat. Every heat that you see, you need to put into this category only. Either it's a spiritual heat or a material heat. Only two categories. So now we want you to ponder about. You remember in the first maxim we were reading about the heat from the sun versus the heat coming from the source. You remember that? So the heat coming from the source is the spiritual heat. The heat coming from the sun is this material heat. And Babuji has given the differences between the two. What you require for spiritual journey is spiritual heat. Learning to tap into the spiritual heat. That is what is the spiritual heat. It is the usefulness of the spiritual heat. Now, the spiritual heat is present from the time of creation till the time of dissolution. It's ever present, the spiritual heat. Our job is to only to tap into it and benefit from that spiritual heat. That's our job. Now, what all the material heat consists of, you please work it out. The heat from the sun, the heat from the mother, the heat from the outside environment, the heat from gas, stove, electric, whatever you can think of. They're all sources of material heat. No amount of material heat is going to give you spiritual benefit. Spiritual benefit is only got by tapping into the spiritual heat. So now, whatever heat you can think of, please put it into these two categories. So when you eat a lot more, by the time you finish eating, you're already sweating. How many times people have experienced that? By the time you stop eating, you're already sweating. So there is already increased heat in the body because of the eating that you're doing. Then that gets converted into fuel. That food is nothing but a fuel. It gets converted into energy and heat as it goes through the body and the mind processes. The samskaras have their own heat. So the point is there are multiple levels of the heat that can be experienced at the level of the body, at the level of the mind, at the level of the samskaras, and at the level of the soul. The heat which we are receiving from the source. So when we say that we meditate and the temperature increases, people do relate it to the increase in the body temperature, the basal metabolic rate during the meditation. But that's at a physical level. Is that's going to give you the spiritual progress in meditation? No. You learn to tap into the spiritual heat that is coming from the source during meditation. In other words, during meditation, you withdraw your attention from the external world, from the physical body, from the mind, from the samskaras, and go into a realm of something where the spiritual heat is present. You learn to stay there in the presence of the spiritual heat. And that increases the spiritual heat in the system. And that is why the meditation is called as tapassu. Now, if you increase the material heat and then sit for meditation, that's not going to be positive as far as the effect of the meditation is concerned. The material heat should be minimal in order that we get more benefit from the spiritual heat. That's why meditation should be the first thing that you do in the morning. So material heat should be minimal when you have to get the benefit from the spiritual heat. That's also the reason why we say take cold bath. Decreases the material heat. It doesn't decrease the spiritual heat. We cannot influence the spiritual heat. We can only modulate the material heat at our level. So you take cold bath, it decreases the material heat. You go for fasting, it decreases the material heat. You decrease your unnecessary thinking and emotions. It decreases the material heat. When the influence of the material heat comes down, we are now more eligible to get the influence of the spiritual heat. All the practices that we do are related to trying to decrease the influence of the material heat and at the same time increase the spiritual heat in the system. It's the spiritual heat that enables the journey, the spiritual journey. Spiritual heat enables the spiritual journey. Material heat does not enable the spiritual journey. Does it make sense?
So Brother Raghu has given the answer. But
Part of the answer I've given you in explaining these two concepts. Now I want you to go back to that chapter Maxim 1 and read about the difference between sun's heat versus spiritual heat, the heat coming from the source. Now trace out the origin of the heat. Where does the heat start? That is the next homework. Where does the heat start? ಇವಾಗ
During
ಗೋಪಾಲ್
the
ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಏನ್ ಹೀಟ್ ಅಂತ ಬುಡಕೆ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕ್ತಾ ಇದಾರಲ್ರಿ ಇವರು ಅಂತ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ
brother,
ಸ್ಪಿರಿಚುವಲ್ ಹೀಟ್ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ಸ್ಪಿರಿಚುವಲ್ ಜರ್ನಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲ, ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ. ಸರಿನಾ? ಬುಡಕ್ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇನೆ ನಾವು ಆಧ್ಯಾತ್ಮಿಕವಾಗಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಇಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ. ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಇವಾಗ ನೀವು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತೀರ, ಯಾರು ಬುಡಕ್ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ರಿ, ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಕೂತಿರ್ತೀರಾ? ನೀವು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ, ಯಾರೋ ಬುಡಕ್ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರಪ್ಪ, ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? You will get up, no? Will you still be like staying like that only? You will not like that. The moment the base is set on fire, you will get up and run. Right? Likewise, when the base is set on fire, you will actually have the spiritual progress. Your tendency to go towards the source becomes increased. That's what we do in meditation. ಸರಿನಾ? ಆಯ್ತು, ಇಬ್ರು ಏನೋ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಹೇಳ್ರಿ.
brother, he mother's heat ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿಲ್ವಲ್ಲ. Yes, you touched upon everything else, but fire in the belly ಅಂತಾರಲ್ಲ. You don't have the fire in the belly. That comes from the mother, they say, you know. What is the...
See, that mother's belly ಇಂದ ಬರೋದು ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೂಡ ಟೆಂಪರರಿ, ಫಿಸಿಕಲ್. Spiritual thing has to come from within. Obviously, we think that it's coming from the mother. No, it doesn't come from the mother. It comes directly from the soul. The soul, which is spiritually inclined, will obviously be born to a spiritually inclined mother only, a devoted mother only. So it's the other way around. Not that the soul develops spiritual inclination because of the mother. It is just that the soul is born to a spiritually inclined mother. That's all. But that soul itself is already spiritually inclined. That's why it seeks that kind of a mother. That's how it is. Not the other way around. Okay? ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಏನೋ ಕೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದೆ, ಬುಡಕ್ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕೋದು ಅಂತ ನಾ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ಅವಾಗ ನೀನು ಕೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದೆ, ಅಷ್ಟರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾ ಬುಡಕ್ ಬೆಂಕಿ ಹಾಕ್ತೆ, ನಿಮ್ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆನೇ ಮಾಯ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು.
I don't think it was a question, it was just something, an observation. But question ಏನಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್, in the context of cosmic and Milky Way, where would Brahmanda and Parabrahmanda come into picture?
Our Milky Way is like a Brahmanda. Okay? It comes from one anda, one egg. So our entire universe that you see is come from one egg. That is Brahmanda. Parabrahmanda is the center. And that's why I asked you to look at the center of the cosmic microwave background, from where it comes. The center is not necessarily in the center. It's somewhere else. We call it a center, but the center is not in the center. Like if you draw an egg, there is a center. But this center is not in the center of the egg. It's somewhere else. And that's what I want you to find out.
So in sixth point, we get to the center of Milky Way galaxy. when we cross sixth point.
That's not the Brahmanda Mandala. That's only Brahmanda Mandala. You only started your journey. In other words, in the sixth point, you go out of the influence of the sun and the planets. That's why at the sixth point, you go beyond the solar system. At the sixth point, the Jataka or Kundali is no longer relevant. So for a person who is being liberated and crossed the sixth point, there is no need to do any rituals post their death, because they are no longer under the influence of the sun and the planetary system. They have crossed it. So the pole star, the north pole star, is outside the influence of the sun and the stars, the planets. Dhruva Nakshatra, or the north pole star, is outside the influence of the sun and the planets. That's why a person who crosses the Pinda Pradesh and enters into the Brahmanda, the first stage of Brahmanda, he is said to be the Dhruva. They're called as Dhruva. So when you enter into the sixth point and stabilize there, you become a Dhruva. Does it make sense? So you are outside the influence of the sun and the planets, the planetary system, the so-called Navagrahas, no? You are outside the influence of that. Outside the influence of the Navagrahas. Now look at the pole star. That's why you remember in the context of the Mahapralaya, Babuji says the pole star will move out of its where it exists. No, it moves slightly. At the time of dissolution, the pole star moves. And then something destructive rays or waves come from the sun. And that destroys the earth and the entire creation. You read that, go back to that chapter. What happens at the time of Mahapralaya? The pole star deviates by few degrees. This is what he writes. So you are outside the influence of the planetary system, Navagrahas. To that extent, that's when you become the pole star. When you become the pole star, you are said to be Dhruva, called as Dhruva, and you are liberated. Now read about the pole star also. Now that you have asked the question, I'll put a homework back to you. Read about the pole star also, the north pole star. ಭರತ್ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸೈಲೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಹೋಮ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇರೋದೇ ಬೆಟ್ರು. Ganesh is also keeping very quiet. Sudha will turn off her video and go to the kitchen. If I'm there in the video only, the homework can be given. Otherwise, who will think and then give homework? See how you have to correlate many things that we read in astrophysics with the thing that we do in our physics at our level. Then spirituality. So ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ ಪೋಲ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಓದಿದ್ರ? Now that I've given you the homework, I have read something but not as much. So I'll also read about the pole star. I've read few things. I told you certain things, what is there in the book and what the science says. But the relationship between the pole star versus the planets, I have not read. But my hunch is that the pole star is outside the influence of the 9 planets. So the 9 planets cannot have a big impact on the pole star. That's my hunch. But anyway, let us see. Let's study that.
So Brahmanda in that sense is just going to Dhruva at that state, going out of planetary.
Going to Brahmanda Mandala is not the journey through Brahmanda. They are different. This is Brahmanda Mandala. Mandala is circle. You are just entering that circle. That's all. Entering the realm of Brahmanda. The outermost circle is the Brahmanda Mandala. As you go through that the circle towards the center of the circle, that is the journey through the Brahmanda. The journey through the Brahmanda is the journey through the Brahman's physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. That is the journey through Brahmanda. Don't confuse the journey of entry into the Brahmanda Mandal as the journey in Brahmanda. They are two different things. You are only starting the journey. When you enter into the Brahmanda Mandal, you are starting the journey of the Brahmanda. Brahmanda journey has three levels. The Brahman's physical body, the Virat, then the Brahman's subtle body, the Antaryami, and then the Brahman's causal body, Hiranyagarbha. That is the journey of the Brahmanda. After you cross the journey of the Brahmanda, what you get is the Parabrahman. Not Parabrahmanda Mandala, but Parabrahman. And that Parabrahman is the center. Something beyond the Brahman. That's why it is called as Parabrahman. So Parabrahman is the center in that way. So you have the Pinda, the Brahman, and the Parabrahman. Three levels.
So once you explained about that space created, and within that space there is one more dot where that our galaxies or our Manda starts. From there, Parabrahma, Brahmanda, and has were formed. Like that was a. So you said between the Parabrahma and that space there is a space which is unexplored still.
Correct.
And above that, there is one more space where we have many different.
That's why Babuji writes, not to create any controversy, he just uses the word towards infinity. Go, go, go. You keep going. Nobody knows where you keep going, but you keep going. So Babuji says center itself is infinite. The ocean around the center is infinite. So you move from one infinity to another infinity. So there are multiple infinities, infinite infinities. Your journey is ever expanding into that infinite infinities.
It's interesting to even think about it, and it creates the craving to experience it further.
Correct. And that's the potential of a human being. That's the importance of human birth. So Discovery Plus ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೋ ಶೋ ಹಾಕ್ಬಿಡಿದೆ ನೋಡಿ, how the universe works ಅಂತ. ಈಗ
And
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ
for
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ
you, I was very much, before joining spirituality, I was very much interested in knowing all this thing. So this also talks about universe. This show, there are 14 to 15 seasons. This is very good show.
ಇವಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಂಸ್ಕಾರಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
And we only get to, I think, this stage once we have been tired of playing the Earth game, right?
Exactly.
We turn our minds towards that direction.
So you need to be a premium member to watch this video ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದಪ್ಪ ಭರತ್.
ಅದು paid it.
ನೀನ್ ಖತರ್ನಾಕ್ ಇದೀಯ. ನೀ ಪೇಡ್ ಮಾಡಿ ವಾಚ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ಯಾ? ಡಿಸ್ಕವರಿ ಚಾನಲ್ ನೀ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಆಗಿದ್ಯಾ? ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ ಇವನ ಹತ್ರ ಯೂಸರ್ ನೇಮ್ ಪಾಸ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಇಸ್ಕೊಡ್ರು ಎಲ್ರು. ಹೇಗಿದ್ರು ಅವರೇ ನೀವು ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನು. ಆಯ್ತು.
In this, there is one yard with us video. The first yard video with us. The ನಾವು ಸ್ಪಿರಿಚುಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಈಗೇನು ಓದಾತಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ರಿಲೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ಸರ್. ದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಹಿಂಗ ಬ್ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದ ಮತ್ತು ಇನ್ನೊಂದೇನು 2 ವಿಡಿಯೋಸ್ ಐತೆ ಸರ್, ಅದು ಭಾಳ ಕೋರಿಲೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ನಾವೀಗ ಏನು ಓದಾತೇವೆ.
ಏನ್ ಕೋರಿಲೇಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದೆಲ್ಲ ಗ್ರೂಪಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕು. ಯಾವ್ದು 2 ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಅಂತೆಲ್ಲ ಹಾಕು. ಪ್ರೀಮಿಯಂ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರೆ ನಿನ್ ಯೂಸರ್ ನೇಮ್ ಪಾಸ್ವರ್ಡ್ ಹಾಕು. ಸರಿನಾ? ಸರಿ. Spirituality is free. So don't ask us to pay for it, to see your videos. ಸರಿನಾ? ಆಯ್ತಾಗ. ಸರಿ ಕಣ್ರೆ. We'll catch up tomorrow as usual at the